All right, thank you all for coming. Thank you, and Ambassador Xiao, thank you for joining this important discussion alongside the members of the China Task Force. And I want to do a special thank you to Congressman McCall for your leadership on the China Task Force. We started this in the last Congress. We had hoped that we'd get Democrats to join with us. I worked for more than 8 months on Speaker Pelosi to join with us. She did say yes, but then backed away at the last minute. But the work that this task force has done, the product that comes out, 90% of this is all bipartisan, so it's critical work. Since 2020, this task force has worked diligently to raise awareness of the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party, which is the greatest geopolitical threat facing America and our friends at Indo-Pacific. This joint meeting symbolizes our enduring partnership and friendship with Taiwan. We are honored to have Ambassador Xiao here as we continue to strengthen our relationship. Taiwan warrants our support because it is vibrant, thriving democracy. If people want peace, freedom, and the right to determine their own future. But over the past few years, we've all seen the mounting aggression coming from Beijing. Hong Kongers being beaten by police, Uyghurs men, women, and children forced into concentration camps, and Taiwanese citizens being threatened with military incursion. The CCP has shown itself to be ruthless, aggressive, and evil dictatorship. We cannot underrate its goal to control through force and brutality. Instead, we must work to deter the CCP, aggression before it's too late. As we have learned in Ukraine, deterrence comes before conflict, not after it. If that's one lesson we should learn. You cannot wait till afterwards. You got to deter before. My colleagues and I have called this meeting because we understand the urgency of the situation. Congress must continue to act not only to deter Communist China, but also to strengthen our ties with Taiwan. I believe we should consider solutions such as increasing arms sales to Taiwan, sending Taiwan the right weapons to deter the CCP, allowing Taiwan to participate in training exercise like the RIM Pact, allowing Taiwan to display their symbols of national sovereignty in the United States, increasing commercial and trade lines, modernizing our own defense industry base to maintain our unmatched military capability. Now, let me be very clear. Supporting Taiwan is right, and it is in America's best interest. And I think that's the view of everybody here that's on the task force as well. With that, I'd like to hand the floor over to the ambassador.
Well, thank you, Leader McCarthy and Chairman McCall, and our very good friends, members of the China Task Force who are here today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to this timely and important roundtable discussion. I want to first express our appreciation for the congressional efforts to establish the China Task Force back in 2020, and for Ranking Member McCall's leadership of this task force. I'm also grateful personally for the many opportunities that I've had to engage with the distinguished members of this task force over the past 2 years on matters of mutual interest. Over the last 2 years, the China Task Force has effectively raised awareness and brought to light the malign behavior of the Chinese Communist behavior around the world and the challenges it poses to the rules-based international order. The 2020 report made many important findings and solid policy recommendations to address some of these challenges, particularly by advocating for strong support for Taiwan's security and a close Taiwan-U.S. partnership, and beyond that, increased international participation for Taiwan. So I want to thank you for these recommendations, and the steadfast bipartisan support for Taiwan has been crucial in maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Now, over the last decade, we've seen the expansion of authoritarian rule around the world, including the tragic deprivation of political freedoms and basic rights in Hong Kong. Now, some might see a critique of authoritarianism as a competition of political systems. But for Taiwan, this is a matter of survival. The survival of maintaining our freedoms and our democratic way of life. China has tried to bully Taiwan by threatening to use force and applying a hybrid toolkit of economic and political leverage to isolate and marginalize Taiwan internationally. And though we stand on the front line of facing such coercion, it is clear that these actions also threaten the peace, stability, and prosperity of the broader Indo-Pacific region and the world. Taiwan is committed to defending our homeland and our hard-earned democratic freedoms. But we also need friends and partners to work together in ensuring that our shared values and common interests are protected. So thank you again for the invitation to join this roundtable, and I look forward to continuing our discussions.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Now let's turn to the chair of the China Task Force, Congressman McCall.
Thank you, Leader, and I want to thank you for creating this task force. And it was supposed to be bipartisan. I think Taiwan is not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. We as Americans stand behind Taiwan. We support her and her democracy. It is a shining beacon of hope in Asia and the Indo-Pacific. General MacArthur said Taiwan in the hands of the communists would be an unsinkable aircraft carrier and submarine base ideally located to accomplish offensive strategy. MacArthur knew how important Taiwan was and is from a logistics standpoint. It's a gateway to the South China Sea and to the Pacific. And it's hard to imagine that my father's war, the greatest generation who conquered the evils of Nazi Germany and also in the Asian Pacific theater, to see what is happening now with Mr. Putin and President Xi trying to rewrite the maps that were drawn after World War II. And we're seeing this not only in Ukraine, but we're seeing this, as the ambassador mentioned, with respect to the Solomon Islands, that the greatest generation liberated now under the thumb of the PRC due to a security agreement where they essentially got bought off in the Belt and Road Initiative that you'll hear us talking a lot about. We are concerned about Taiwan for obvious reasons. They are in the sights of President Xi. He's recently said, as he met with President Putin at the Beijing Olympics, forming this unholy alliance with an unlimited partnership, they called it, against the West, talking about Taiwan. He says Taiwan's independence is a dead end. He says that attempts to cause division in China will end in crushed bodies and shattered bones. And finally, he says supporting Taiwan is playing with fire, and whoever plays with fire will get burnt. This is the president of China, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. I would like to also mention, when it comes to arms sales, as the leader mentioned, we need to do everything we can to arm Taiwan now and not make the same mistake we made in Ukraine and wait till after an invasion. We need to arm Taiwan right now. I signed off on foreign military sales 3 years ago that have yet to be delivered to Taiwan. I'm urging the administration to get these weapons to Taiwan where they desperately need them to defend themselves. And I also want to thank Representative Young Kim, who got a bill, Arms Exports Delivery Solutions Act, passed in the NDAA. This is going to help, I think, with the issue I'm talking about with foreign military weapon sales. Now is the time. Let's not wait until it's too late. I yield back.
Let's actually turn to the Congresswoman on your side. Kim.
Thank you very much, Leader, for inviting me to join you here at this press conference and our China Task Force roundtable discussion. Thank you, Ranking Member McCall, for your leadership on this. And I would like to welcome our dear friend, Ambassador Xiao, to Capitol Hill. I represent California's 39th Congressional District, which has a very large Taiwanese American community, and as my constituents, I not only call them constituents, but they're my dear friends for many, many years and decades. And so I just want to say that Taiwan is a really important ally of the United States and a friend in freedom, democracy, and global health security. And as Taiwan faces growing aggression from the Chinese Communist Party, our partnership is more important than ever. And as Russia invades Ukraine, China eyes Taiwan. They are sending dozens of warplanes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone and demanding that we end our defense relationship with Taiwan. As Ranking Member McCall mentioned, Taiwan has purchased billions of dollars worth of military equipment and defense systems from the United States, including Patriot missile system upgrades, F-16 fighter jets, Stinger missile systems, and other items critical for ensuring Taiwan's security. We need to send a strong message that our allies need to trust us. Our allies need to receive their procured defense equipment in a timely manner. And America's words must be trusted by our allies, feared by our adversaries, and followed by strong, decisive leadership and action by our leaders. Any delays only help Xi Jinping. That's why I'm leading that Arms Exports Delivery Solutions Act, along with Ranking Member McCall, to ensure this defense equipment is delivered as quickly as possible to our Indo-Pacific allies as the Chinese Communist Party continues its aggression. That passed the House as part of NDAA, as was mentioned, and I'm proud that this is a bipartisan effort to support Taiwan and our allies in the region. Thank you. I look forward to our continued dialogue and conversation.
With that, let's turn to Congressman Green for his statement as well.
Thank you, Leader McCarthy, for putting the task force together, Ranking Member McCall, for your leadership and all the work that's gone into this. Ambassador Shao, it's great to see you again. Taiwan is a thriving democracy. It is a technological powerhouse, and it's a crucial friend to the United States. They're a close security ally, a top trading partner. They're our 10th largest export market and the 7th largest source of imports. Unfortunately, in the aftermath of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Communist China has ramped up its threats against Taiwan. As members of Congress, we must take action to deter China and affirm Taiwan's right to exist. For instance, the House passed an FY 2023 NDAA calls for more U.S.-Taiwanese military cooperation, such as including work with the naval forces in the RIMPAC exercises and prioritizing additional joint military exercises. It also calls upon the United States government to continue support and development of capable, ready, and modern defense forces. We've talked about the backlog already in the already approved, for years now, defense exchanges, military exchanges. Additionally, we must take steps to deter China's diplomatic bullying of Taiwan. The CCP has worked tirelessly in places like, well, Latin America, where I serve as the ranking member on the Western Hemisphere, strong-arming countries into severing diplomatic ties with Taiwan, and it's ridiculous. Since 2017, countries like Panama, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, and Nicaragua have all cut ties with Taiwan as a result of China's bullying. As both a member of the Armed Services Committee and a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I find China's malign activities in our hemisphere deeply concerning. Nothing less, as the leader said, nothing less than our national security is at stake. In this vein, the HASC will ask the Defense Department to conduct a thorough report on China's malign activities in our hemisphere. And additionally, I introduced the bipartisan Western Hemisphere Nearshoring Act with Chairman Sears and the guidance of Ranking Member McCall. This bill would return manufacturing to our hemisphere from China, reduce our supply chain dependence on Chinese manufacturing, reduce migration by fostering economic prosperity amongst our southern borders. Again, I want to thank Leader McCarthy, Ranking Member McCall, and of course, Ambassador, for your strong friendship and for hosting this event today. I look forward to hearing from everyone.
With that, I want to open up questions, but I do want to take one moment. I want to thank all the members of the task force. We're going to get into the discussion now and for all the comments before, but let's start out with some questions from the audience. Yes, you and go right ahead.
Is a military intervention or intervention from the United States what the people of Taiwan want, or is there another deterrent?
Well, thank you for the question. I think we take the United States' commitments to Taiwan seriously, and these commitments have been made over the past many decades through the Taiwan Relations Act and also the 6 assurances in helping Taiwan with our self-defense. Of course, the threat that we are facing is increasing, and therefore we certainly need to also enhance our cooperation on many fronts, and we hope to continue to deepen that cooperation.
Yes, sir.
Exercises near Taiwan. What steps are the House GOP taking to damper China's moves and ensure Taiwan can defend herself?
Well, I think today should show one example, but what we've talked, even in my opening statement, from participating in the RIM Pack, the frustration we have, as Chairman McCall talked about, signing off on foreign military sales 3 years ago, the delay of that. I know if we are fortunate enough to take the majority, we'll be able to push that and make sure those sales go through further. I think the world has learned a very valuable lesson in Ukraine. If actions were taken with the equipment that is moving to Ukraine today, if it was moved prior to the invasion, there's a very good chance there wouldn't have been an invasion. So it's really the actions you take ahead of time to deter war from ever taking place. And I think when you have a friend and a partner and a democracy like Taiwan, you want them to be able to defend themselves. They want to pay for it, and they have financially, and we want to be able to provide them the weapons. The slowing them down, I think, causes greater problems and greater concern around. I don't know if anybody else wants to tackle that.
Yeah, if I could just, I mean, China has become more provocative, and I know this administration doesn't like being provocative, but we've had 3 aircraft now, one from Australia, one from Canada, one from the United States, with military incursions. One so aggressive that they literally bumped the Australian aircraft and then threw, out aluminum foil that went into the engine of the Australian aircraft. So this is really getting, the pace is getting a little higher and hotter, if you will. And I think, the world needs to pay attention to this. We need more exercises, I think, in the region to show deterrence and show strength, not weakness.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask about the backlog of military sales to Taiwan. I know Congresswoman Kim has her NDAA amendment. My understanding is that a lot of it is due to supply chain issues. So do you folks right now have recommendations on what needs to be done to address that? And second, unrelated question, I'm wondering if I could get your folks' reaction to reports that Speaker Pelosi plans to visit Taiwan next month.
No. But this is more than 3 years ago. This is why we need to focus, and one thing Republicans are doing, our domestic development here. If we're having challenges to supply it with Taiwan and we're supplying weapons to Ukraine, rebuilding the American arsenal is important as well. We need that domestic capability of manufacturing here in the United States at the same time. But I don't believe that's the only issue why it's being delayed. We should be able to speed this up. I think it will make the world entirely safe. I've got a number of members here who served in the military. I got Mr. Garcia, who not only flew F-18s, but worked in the defense industry as well. If you want to touch it, or Mr. Gallagher?
Yeah.
I think the best way to say it when it comes to FMS sales, and frankly to our domestic production as well, because we're struggling getting weapons to our own troops right now in this environment. But actually that goes back several years. It's not just unique to the supply chain issues and COVID. The bottom line is that when it comes to these agreements and our exports, especially on FMS and weapon sales, speed is life. And we've got to figure out as a nation how to get the right weapons to the right partners in a timely fashion without overcomplicating it. We need to protect the technology, we need to protect the end users and maintain a technical advantage over our adversaries. But we can do that while still moving quicker than we are. This is artificially slow right now. And so I think part of it is just ending this us versus them mentality between the Pentagon and our defense production partners. Coming together, figuring out what the barriers to speed are, and figuring out how to get technologies to our own war fighters, but also to our strategic partners like Taiwan and Israel. And I'll just echo the sentiment that Every lever that we pulled against Russia relative to the Ukraine invasion needs to be pulled now against China relative to a threat against Taiwan. If we do that in this timely fashion, before the bullets start flying and people start dying, we will avert a war. We will avert an attempted annexation of Taiwan. But we've got to move quickly. Speed is life in that regard.
Let me turn to Mr. Gallagher, who's worked a great deal on this issue as well.
A few points. First, it didn't help that the budget that the Biden administration submitted amounted to a cut in real terms to the military. That sent a bad signal to the defense industrial base, and what we've seen in recent years is just how brittle that defense industrial base has become. Luckily, we reversed and repudiated that proposed budget in bipartisan fashion on HASS. We have still have some work to do in terms of appropriation, but sending that overall signal to the defense industrial base that we are committed to rebuilding the military will help us with shortfalls in munitions. Second point related to that is we also need to change the way we buy these munitions. We just burned through 7 years worth of javelins in Ukraine. So on any given weapon system, you could have long lead items that you need to purchase in bulk in order to be able to stockpile munitions in theater prior to the outbreak of conflict. The reports we're hearing is that Harpoons aren't scheduled to reach Taiwan until 2028. That's too late. Saudi Arabia is still ahead of Taiwan on the priority list in some cases. We need to take a look at that. And I finally just would say that it's not just a matter of buying more weapon systems or long-range fires. You need places to fire those systems from. And in that sense, the defense of Taiwan doesn't just involve the territory that is Taiwan. It also requires us to get certain diplomatic agreements with Japan when it comes to their southern island chain, the Ryukyus, as well as northern islands and Philippines, and take advantage of the fact that we're no longer bound by the restrictions of the INF Treaty because, of course, the Trump administration pulled us out of it. So it's a complex problem, but it's one that we can solve if we act with a sense of urgency.
Let's go to Mr. Waltz as well.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I just wanted to add to the supply chain issue there because it's a bit of a negative circular logic. The Chinese Communist Party is actively, as a matter of strategy, seeking to create global dependencies, whether that's on food supplies, trade routes, most notably on rare earth minerals that are the basic elements that go into computer chips or go into, for example, battery storage. So they are actively dominating certain aspects of the global economy, namely lithium, manganese, others of these elements. One that we've recently discovered is antimony, which is a key element in the primer for ammunition. The Chinese Communist Party has dominated that market, and we just put into this most recent defense bill a directive for the Defense Department to create its own stockpile, much like we have a strategic petroleum stockpile. We need our own stockpile of these critical rare earth elements, and we have to bring those supply chains back home. If the CCP is threatening to shut them down, as a matter of course to our allies like Japan, Australia, or even the United States, imagine what they will do if they know that these elements are being used to reinforce and to support our ally in Taiwan. And so it's absolutely critical we bring those supply chains back home.
One element I'd add to that is not just getting the critical mineral, it's the processing. China controls 95% of that. So you might get a critical mineral in America, but to process it, go there. One of the elements that in the commitment to America that so many of these individuals have worked on that we'll be rolling out is rebuilding our supply chain. It's one thing to be able to supply the weapons to America and to Taiwan, but we're having challenges with baby formula. We're having challenges all the way down. And that's the change in a new administration in the House that would be able to do. Next question. Yes, sir.
Next month is going to be the one-year anniversary of the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and there were promises that were made, and that leader and promises weren't kept. So when it comes to this situation and this whole thing that we're dealing with currently, how confident is Taiwan? How confident is the rest of the country that we're going to be able to actually deliver on some of these promises and some of these commitments that you guys have lined out here, if push were to come to shove in the worst case scenario?
Well, speaking to us, and especially from the Republican conference, if we are fortunate enough to take the majority, you're going to be more confident that that gets delivered. I'll let a few members here that did a great deal of work in Afghanistan as well. I'll first turn to Mr. McCall.
Yeah, we're foreign affairs. the Foreign Affairs Committee will be releasing a report on Afghanistan on the one-year anniversary. I do think that it was seen as a moment of weakness across the globe, and our foreign adversaries became more empowered and emboldened by what happened. And you'll see in the report a lot of, quite honestly, mistakes American citizens left behind, Afghan partners that have been tortured and killed by the Taliban. Don't think that Putin and Xi weren't watching that moment. In fact, when we look at the troops around Ukraine and Belarus, they had a rotation of Russian troops that were going to redeploy back, and instead, after Afghanistan, they stayed. They stayed there to launch and prepare the invasion, which took place.
Yes, ma'am.
Ambassador Xiao, do you believe that the risk is heightened for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan after the Russian invasion of Ukraine? And if so, what would change that calculation?
Well, we are seeing some intensifying acts of coercion towards Taiwan, as I said in my opening remarks. And a lot of our friends here have used the keyword deterrence. And I think everything we are doing now is to deter an actual invasion of Taiwan. We need to strengthen our own self-defenses, and a number of projects are taking place, including strengthening our own asymmetric capabilities, reserve reform, but we also need to strengthen our capabilities in many other areas, including economic resilience, which addresses some of the supply chain challenges, the global challenges that we're speaking of, and also reduces the vulnerabilities we have on overdependency. We're also working to build greater international partnerships. In addition to the strength and commitment of our American friends and the partnerships that we have, we do want to broaden our friends, our circle of friends, and build up more partnerships around the world, especially among fellow democracies. For we do share the same, we do share common interests in a rules-based international order and in the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait.
Thank you all very much for participating with us. Appreciate that. Now, once they're escorted out, we'll continue our conversation. If that works.
I just got back.
Yes, Neil.
Massive transformation happening there that could really tip the balance for us, and something we have to think about, in addition to weapon systems that are delayed. So,
I think there's some key points right away. The first thing we've got to do is speed up delivery to deter. The military makes you strong, dependency makes you weak. One of the key things that this task force has been doing that we need to do in the next Congress is looking at every industry that China has has the ability to control, right? Critical minerals is very important, but the processing, they control 90% of critical minerals, but 95% of the processing. But we should look all the way down into the food process. Everything should be key of where we go. And one of the key elements we can, hopefully showing to Taiwan and others, just by creating this group, even though the Democrats didn't want to participate, the outcome is bipartisan. And I think that's a really strong showing for everybody of our ideas. Yes, Chris, you grab that mic.
So a couple things, if I could, Ambassador. It's great to see you. You've been a great friend for many of us, and thanks again for coming out to this security summit we're hosting in a couple weeks. I know it's a long travel for you, but thank you for doing that. Yeah, Kevin's been actually a couple times, I think. So, hey, you know, one of the things that the former president was criticized for was the pressure he exerted on NATO to pay their commitments to NATO dues, the 2% of their GDP. He was told that he was weakening NATO by doing that, you know, alienating our allies, et cetera. And I know that you've been asked this question before, and we've talked about it several times, just you and I as well as others. Give us an update, if you would, on Taiwan's response to that, recognizing that, you know, we need to send you this aid, and obviously that's helpful and critical from both of our perspectives. But do you think there's been a shift in urgency in Taiwan recently? And do you think that among your leadership, and do you think that's going to translate into a greater commitment to fund the defense that's essential from both our position and from yours?
Yes, well, you know, the tragedy of Ukraine has certainly generated painful reflections within our society, and what we need to do to be prepared for a worst-case scenario. Of course, everything we're doing is to prevent and to deter such a disaster from being replicated in our homeland. But I have to say there are a few trends in Taiwan. One is since President Tsai's leadership in 2016, our defense budget has increased by over 30%. And that includes not just the regular budget for acquisition, but also for investing in our own defense industry within Taiwan. And also, secondly, the polls in Taiwan have demonstrated an increasing resolve among the Taiwanese public for defending our freedoms and defending our way of life. That includes a greater degree of support for reform of our reserve system so that they're better trained, and support for civil society support for our defense efforts as well. And so we have recently established an all-out mobilization, all-out defense mobilization agency that does incorporate the concept of civil defense and incorporates the strength of our reserves too. And so I think, yes, there has been some reflection and acknowledgement that we have to strengthen our defenses, and we are investing in that. And quickly on NATO, you know, again, the tragedy has also generated some reflection there, and we have seen an increase also in investment in defense among other NATO allies of the United States. And it is, you know, it's unfortunate that tragedies have that outcome, but we're all working on it.
Thank you, Chairman McCall. Madam Ambassador, always nice to meet with you. Where should we prioritize getting Taiwan recognized internationally? For example, we all know the arms sales would be a phenomenal deterrent. But what about the fact that, for example, the World Health Organization won't allow Taiwan to have a representative, despite the fact that it was the Taiwanese who correctly said COVID spread human to human back in December of 2019. Where should we, as elected officials, prioritize the international recognition vis-a-vis actual arms sales?
Well, thank you, and I want to thank Congress for supporting Taiwan's participation in the World Health Organization. I recall a recent vote of 425-0, and I think that is a very impressive demonstration of unwavering American support, and that's very meaningful. Thank you for that. There are a number of other international organizations that we're working on, including ICAO, which governs civil aviation safety. That's important for all of us. Again, where you have a missing link, it's a breach of security for all. We're also working on Interpol, the International Police Crime Fighting Agency, in terms of Taiwan's participation. But in addition to that, we appreciate that there's also been support from the United States, and we want to continue to expand and build on that for our relations with countries that have diplomatic ties with Taiwan, some of them in the Western Hemisphere that you just mentioned, our good friends, Guatemala, Honduras, Paraguay, and others. And we want to make sure that these solid ties continue with the support of the United States. There are some other new partners where we're building relations. Some of them are being bullied by China. For example, Lithuania is being bullied economically by the PRC for establishing economic partnership with Taiwan. And I think it's important that others stand by them as they encounter such unfair, unreasonable bullying behavior.
We'll see Austin. And then
Thank you, Chairman and Ambassador. It's good to see you here. And I think when we talk about communist China, I mean, we have to recognize communism in and of itself is a threat to the free world. But communist China is particularly aggressive, not just with Taiwan. They're illegally fishing off of the west coast of Africa. It wasn't that long ago that another communist country actually asked the United States for assistance in combating the illegal fishing, which was occurring in Vietnam, and our former president sent an aircraft carrier over there as a sign of strength. You've got the theft of technology that occurs from China, and while their aggression towards Taiwan is particularly concerning, it's not limited to Taiwan. One of the things we've talked about is the weapon systems for Taiwan, and certainly we've been slow in getting them, but I would also suggest to you that we've been slow in getting you the training that you need as well. And so the NDAA, and Mark Green brought this up, includes an invitation to the Taiwanese Navy to participate in the 2024 RIMPAC exercise, and I'm looking forward to that. And I also support Taiwan's armed forces being able to partner with our state National Guard programs so that we can train together in case we have to fight together. So just know it won't just be the U.S. that comes to your aid. It would be other countries as well in the Quad. As you know, Australia is committed. I was there recently. Japan is committed, and India is committed as well. And so we certainly need to make sure that when Communist China looks at the calculus, that they understand there's going to be a whole lot more pain than there is benefit to moving against your country.
Madam Ambassador, it's good to see you again. So my question is actually geared around any conversations that your government or your leaders have had with specifically our executive branch. I know that the Taiwan Relations Act neither requires the U.S. to act in defense of Taiwan, nor does it relinquish us of an option to do that. But one of the most obvious things to me, and I think, frankly, the most effective deterrent, would be to have the United States sign up to something akin to an Article 5 type resolution in support of NATO, but instead, obviously in support of Taiwan. This would be extremely effective, and I think you ultimately never have to pull that lever if it's communicated correctly, and if we actually put the military force behind it in the region with a true pivot to the Pacific, and not just words on a document, pivot to the Pacific. But what conversations have happened to either update, amend the Taiwan Relations Act to maybe give a little more conviction behind the American support of Taiwan militarily, if in fact the Chinese do decide to do something irrational?
That Taiwan is certainly not Afghanistan. We are not Ukraine. We have our unique set of strategic interests, and strategically the value of Taiwan and the importance of the survival of our democracy, the value it has on the world, I think is very often highlighted in our conversations. And in terms of legislative initiatives, I think Congress, for dozens of pieces of initiatives that have been proposed over the past years, and some of them have been included in the NDAA proposals. And my office, we will continue to work with with Congress to find creative solutions in supporting our immediate needs and as we work to fortifying our ability to deter.
Have you asked directly, though, for or requested a statement from either the executive branch or Congress that we would directly support you in the event of an invasion? Militarily. What's that? Is that still valid, though, with the Taiwan Relations Act in place since then? It kind of gets overridden, I believe. But, right. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is maybe we get something white and less ambiguous that just says, hey, if you go crazy, you're gonna pay the price for it. And similar to what we have with our NATO partners. And I agree wholeheartedly, what you represent on the global stage, and especially in America's national security interests, is far greater than what any other, I hate to say, it's more important than Ukraine, I'll be honest. From a national strategic perspective, Taiwan is more important to us if things go sideways. Yeah, I think we should push that. No, I know, I said that. Yeah, that's why I was careful. I wasn't putting words in your mouth. That was my perspective. I think the impact of an annex or attempted annexation of Taiwan would have a much more devastating effect than what we have seen come out of the Ukrainian annexation attempts. It's going to be on a whole new level.
Thank you, Chairman McCall, and thank you, Ambassador, for being here. It's always good to see you. I guess my concern is I know that Chinese spies and hackers have really tried to target the Taiwanese semiconductor industry, and it's one of their top targets. What is your government doing, or what can we do to help you protect that critical industry from any kind of cyber sabotage?
Cybersecurity is a very important area. That is, part of our security interest, is part of your security interest as well. Yes. And so, we continue to look for opportunities to deepen our cooperation in that area. We also are, looking into ways to fortify our own, domestic protection of our talent, of our intellectual copyrights, of our technology, and of our industry. And there's no one single solution to that, but it's important that we work with other allies and like-minded friends around the world to ensure that these industries continue to serve the purpose of advancing human progress and not used as means of control or surveillance. And there's a lot we are doing in expanding production, including investments here in the United States, and certainly hope that that will be supported by our friends here.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think it's important to point out that you get 90% of advanced semiconductor manufacturing in Taiwan. And I didn't say this but if she invades Taiwan and controlling 90% of that global supply would be absolutely devastating. Yeah, Darren?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ambassador. Thanks for your courage and your resilience and your leadership. Can you talk a little bit about the AUKUS agreement with Australia? We heard a lot with that agreement on, obviously China was, very opposed to that, has spoken out against that. Tell me what that does for the region and other like-minded agreements that we ought to be thinking about. I know there's some talk about India wanting to be engaged on nuclear subs now and others. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Taiwan's not exactly a party to AUKUS.
I understand.
But we, see that as a fortification of partners between the United States and allies, Australia and the United Kingdom. And we certainly hope that like-minded democracies will work in sync in the area in defending the status quo and the security and stability of the region. In terms of other, security infrastructure, we don't have any such thing as a NATO in the Indo-Pacific region, but there are a number of bilateral security arrangements that are present, and in terms of our own bilateral security partnership with the United States, it's absolutely critical to our continuing ability to defend ourselves, and we will continue to work on it.
And in terms of that bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan, why hasn't that been replicated with other like-minded democracies in the Indo-Pacific region?
Taiwan is a unique partner for you. Our relationship is governed by the Taiwan Relations Act that was ratified by Congress. With some other Indo-Pacific partners, you have treaty allies and other sets of agreements. And our hope is that we also want to express our appreciation for President Biden as he outreaches to some of these other leaders around the world in a bilateral context, that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is often underscored in the leadership summits, whether it's the bilateral summits or G7, and also in discussions with NATO. And that makes clear that stability and peace in the Taiwan Strait is a matter of global interest. And it's also a very important message of deterrence.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, the distances, we sometimes don't really think about this, but the distances in Asia are on huge scales compared to what they are in Europe. And our ability to respond in Ukraine was because we had forces prepositioned in Germany. The Stryker Brigade rolled into Romania very quickly. We have to kind of rethink our positioning of forces in the Pacific to be a little better prepared for responses. But I want to make one other point too, though, and it kind of goes back to the concept of do we throw ambiguity to the curb? Honestly, I think we need to sit down and come up with a new Shanghai Communique. We've got to sit down and have China redraw its red lines. Our red lines need to be discussed, because we're at a precipice right now, and Xi has taken China in a different direction than previous premiers. And so I think it's time for us to sit down and redraw a new Shanghai Communique.